So last slide before I hop into our little FTP XML demo. There's three high-level buckets that our customers are using our cloud application integration for. The first, and the one that we're going to see a little bit of today is around our service orchestrations. So you can create a process-based response to a number of different types of business events, whether it's a web service call coming in or an outbound message, or in the case that we're about to show, a file dropping into a folder or an FTP location. We can listen to different cues like JMS, AMQP. I like to say if a tree falls in the woods, we can trigger a business event. And so you can write the process that's specific to the actual data without having to worry about what you're listening to. So if your process today is that somebody FTPs you an XML file, but then someday they want to start sending that to you via a web service call, your process that you've designed will work for the payload, whether it's picking it up as a file or if it's coming in as a JSON or XML. So that's the kind of the approach that we want to, you folks to be able to take. We got some secret sauce when it comes to Salesforce integration, as well as NetSuite. We have the ability to plug in to your Salesforce so that we can be aware of all the metadata that's there in our designer, your pick list values, your record types, your custom fields. And then also we make it really easy to utilize outbound messages from Salesforce, something that's traditionally been a challenge to hand code against because, it's a complicated SOAP payload. It's got all these, it sends along the session ID so you can authenticate it back with Salesforce to make sure it's coming from your org, et cetera, et cetera. But it does give you some good things because you can launch them with workflow rules rather than writing Apex. And then also they have automated retries and a few other nice bells and whistles that if you get them working right can be very helpful. And so, we'll show you some of that as well. We can do these orchestrations just by sending our process the ID. You don't have to do a bunch of formula fields and SOQL. And then the last piece has to do with actually a visualization layer. You put a little Visualforce component onto a standard page layout, and you're able to publish what we call guides. So rather than writing Visualforce for every single little page of a process, you can use our designer to make calls out to APIs and databases, bring back, say, a list of potential matches, allow the end user to select one, and then move on with the process without having to copy them first into Salesforce. But unless there's any specific questions, I think I'm going to jump into the demonstration that I put together. So I took a swing at it, and I created a little XML file that's going to simulate an orders file that you guys might get dropped into your location. And so this one here, it looks like it's going to be a list of orders that come in. These are going to be turned into opportunities within Salesforce. And so it's got a couple pieces of information here. It's got the customer ID, which is actually going to be the NetSuite internal ID. I don't know what ID your partners would send you, but we're going to, that's what I'm going to use as my little key. There's the purchase order number that's coming from the customer, and then things like transaction date. And then we've got a list of items on the order, that, have little bits of pieces of information. But this SKU name is important because it's going to match up to a value, an inventory item or a non-inventory item value within NetSuite that we've synced into Salesforce using Informatica Cloud. Taking a step back, just where the designer lives. So we've seen what the data is going to look like. There's your main workspace here. You start off by coming right into what we call our activity log, which shows all the different batch tasks that have been scheduled and run and what their status is. You can design them within these task wizards, which I don't know if you've maybe seen on the previous call, merits its own discussion because, this, what we call our 6-step wizard is definitely something that could streamline a lot of your point-to-point integrations. But where we want to talk about is a more of a services-oriented approach based on a business event, a transaction, what happens. So I'm going to go to my service and process designer. File process this order list to Salesforce. And so all I need to do to get started is give it a name, say that I want this to run either as a REST or a SOAP call. So it just, by default, we expose both REST and SOAP endpoints, so you don't even have to tell us in advance what it's supposed to be. That's not something to worry about. You just tell us what the inputs and outputs are. And in this case, it's going to be that XML file. And if the file name contains 2017, it's going to process the order to Salesforce. If it doesn't contain 2017, it's going to process the order to a database. We actually let you check the file name to see, what happens there. And then, after that processing occurs, it's going to go ahead and write the process object, that we created now with a new opportunity ID for every order back to a different folder on our server. All right, so I apologize for all the kind of complexity of the setup, but when I heard about the use case, I definitely felt very familiar, and so I wanted to make it hopefully as real as possible without having the full details of the use case. So we've got our process, we've got our server. I'm going to go ahead and grab this file, and then as you can see right now, it doesn't have anything kind of information about opportunity ID at the current time, but we're going to inject that into it as we go through. So I'm going to go into my folder here. I'm just going to drop this into my XML folder. Paste. So you can see right now it's actually processing that file. If this was FTP, it would be a similar. I think the lag somewhere in the area of less than 5 seconds for most files. I can dig back in. I didn't have an FTP server handy to connect to last night, but what it does is after it processes the file, it'll automatically do a file operation where it moves the original to a subfolder. And now what we can do, we can come in and take a look at our output and see how we did. So this was the output that came out the far side. And as you can see, it's basically the same, except now we've got an opportunity ID plugged in to each row. So let's go take a look and see how we did. So here's my my Salesforce instance that came across, at the stage is probability 90%. And there's my 2 products with those product codes, price and line items. So we were able to create that opportunity within Salesforce. I'm going to just set the stage to close one. All right, so there's some use cases where files are coming in and creating opportunities, and then there's also others where you're manually creating opportunities here, and then it's going to generate the XML file for you, right?
Yep.
Okay, so all right. Well, what I've put together, because I wasn't sure what the kickoff event was going to be, I designed a little process that will create a little account detail file based on, in this case, the Netsuite ID of the account. So, using the same designer, what I've done is I've set up a process that's going to query, whatever accounts I want based on certain, the criteria, in this case, the Netsuite ID. And then it's going to go through a process where it actually steps through the list of accounts. And then from there, it goes through, the opportunities, the contacts, the cases. Each one is a process that you design and say, this is what I want to do for one row, which is basically populate these values to the XML from these fields in Salesforce. And then for all the little, and then just run it for each child that I've decided to do in a query. So it's really easy to set up in terms of one of these processes. You just need to decide what the kickoff event is. And so from our case, we just said we wanted it to be a web service. And so here we've got this service URL created. And so, this is, I'm going to show you how we can also trigger it automatically, but just so these sorts of things, you can fire them off in all kinds of ways. In this case, I'm just going to use, a sample of a web service call that you would make, using like a web portal or some other application that needs this event to occur in a timely manner. Looks like I've got my create account detail file. This is the basic payload that I would send in, defined within my process. Here I just say, this is what I'm going to expect of JSON, and then I want back, the dump from Salesforce. So if we go in here, send. So this is processing behind the scenes, getting the information, stepping through each of the individual child objects, and then it's going to return the data both kind of as a response here within the web service console, as well as it's actually writing the file. There it goes. So here's the response that we got back. Now it came back in JSON because I asked for it in JSON, the content type here. I could just set application XML, and it would have returned this response as an XML. And then here on this side, on my files, I go back and find my SFDC to XML file. Here's this account data for 997. So here's the whole dump of XML data from Salesforce. And so I just have to think about it in terms of, all right, well, what item of an opportunity product will map to, this order item array and the different values that go into the header. And then once I want to automate this, if I'm no longer interested in firing this, based on a web service call or something, I can go back to my process that I created for when opportunities go to closed won, and just say, all right, after we've gone through the steps of creating the opportunity, I want to just go ahead and add as a new step at the end of this process, let's go ahead and dump that account detail file. So now that process that I called as a web service, reusable here, I select sub-process, come in, and I go to, call this one, create account detail file. So this is what the process is expecting. The in-customer ID is actually going to come, not from the opportunity, but rather the account, Netsuite ID. And then we do want to write the file. So apply, save, publish. Publishing creates this new version of the process within our cloud, so you can actually introduce changes to something that you're calling from Salesforce without having to do a Salesforce release. As long as the logic is, hey, call this Informatica process, then you can actually make tweaks between Salesforce releases potentially. I mean, it's all the metadata for this is stored in our cloud. To our opportunity. We'll go ahead and refresh. Excellent. So, not only did we get a NetSuite ID here, and we got this transaction ID, we got some NetSuite status back. So let's go ahead and take a look at our file. Oh, I didn't include, oh wait, yeah, there it is. There's my sales order ID. Now I got a NetSuite ID in the output that we dropped here, with these particular products. So we wrote the file based on the event of the opportunity closing, and we actually got it in NetSuite in the whole swing. And then this is not NetSuite only. We can actually do things like come in here, for example, and say, oh, no, we've talked to the customer, you've got the purchase order all wrong, you've left this 3 alone, we can drop 3 in here. So using NetSuite scripts, rather than outbound messages, we call our endpoint, push it over to Salesforce. And I'll leave these last 5 minutes for you folks to, bam, there's our two-way real-time integration.